Chapter 41, Strength in Numbers. Sonny was sprawled in the mud, looking at the sky. He didn't even have to catch his breath since the whole fight took less than 10 seconds from start to finish. No one was dead, wounded, or even bruised. Well, with the exception of the scavenger, it was completely out of his expectations. He glanced at the monster's corpse to make sure that it was actually dead, then summoned the runes and took a look at the number of shadow fragments in his possession. Shadow fragments, 161000. It was actually true. The mighty awakened beast perished just like that, and although Nephi's did most of the work, he was the one to deal the killing blow. Why can't it always be so easy? Sonny got back on his feet and dismissed the azure blade. Then he remembered the words Master Jet had once told him. No one can survive in the dream realm alone. Back then, he noted her advice, but didn't really believe it. After all, he had always strived to be self-sufficient, not allowing himself to depend on anyone. In Sonny's mind, this was the true meaning of strength. However, now he was beginning to suspect that this logic was flawed. Indeed, having someone to share your burdens meant the difference between heaven and hell here in the dream realm. If he was alone, fighting against a single scavenger might have been the end of him. Similarly, even though Nephi's was far more skilled than Sonny, it would have been extremely hard for her to defeat the armored monster alone, being that its weakest point was out of her reach. But together they had accomplished it with relative ease. The whole was greater than the sum of the parts. In other words, there was strength in numbers that surpassed individual power. In that sense, being able to depend on a group was not a sign of weakness, but on the contrary, an important facet of personal strength. Lone wolves would always be at a disadvantage. That was another lesson too. Learned. It's not like I had much of a choice. He walked over to Nephi's and checked if she was okay. Apart from slight damage to her makeshift seaweed clothes, everything seemed to be all right. She glanced at Sonny. Memory. He shook his head. Nephi's sighed. It seemed that she was a bit impatient to get herself a suit of armor of her own. If Sonny was a gentleman, he would have suggested to loan her the puppeteer's shroud for a while, but alas, he wasn't. That armor was extremely valuable and had cost him a lot. Plus, unlike Changing Star, the picture of Sonny wearing nothing but a seaweed loincloth would have been more disturbing than aesthetically pleasing, so he said nothing. Meanwhile, Nephi's headed for the dead scavenger and said without turning, "Her head bring Cassie." With a sigh, Sonny turned around and left the clearing. Soon, he approached the place where the blind girl was waiting patiently for their return. Hearing his footsteps, she flinched and raised her head. Sonny. How did she recognize me? Ah, must be the way I walk. Yeah, it's me. Everything is over. Come on, I'll bring you to Nephi's. Using the wooden staff, Cassie stood up and turned to him. Are you guys all right? Sonny smiled. Of course, we dispatched that critter in no time, didn't even get a scratch. Cassie smiled with visible relief. Good, that's good. Oh, right, the rope. Sonny took the rope and guided the blind girl back to the clearing. On the way, he felt a bit weird. With the delicate girl walking behind him, he couldn't help but think of his little sister. As a toddler, she used to follow him around too, as though they were glued together. As the familiar pain stabbed him in the heart, Sonny gritted his teeth and tried to think about something else. It was all in the past anyway. Back in the clearing, Nephi's was done breaking apart the scavengers. Carapace, the shimmering soul shard, was already in her hand. Without saying anything, she tossed it to Sonny. He caught the crystal and looked at her with surprise. Why are you giving it to me? Nephi's blinked and stayed quiet for a few seconds. Then she said as a matter of fact, I don't have pockets. Oh. Still a bit bewildered, Sonny put the soul shard into his rucksack. But why wouldn't she just absorb it? He opened his mouth to ask the question, but she seemed to realize something and added, we'll divide the spoils later. All right. Nephi's, meanwhile, turned to Cassie and said after some deliberation, I was careful. Then she smiled. Your shadow grows stronger. Your shadow grows stronger. Your shadow grows stronger. Sonny was feeling somewhere in between, of being ecstatic and peeved. Throughout the day, they managed to kill 3 more scavengers, each time, with not much risk to anyone except for Nephi's. The process was largely the same. After discovering the monster, he would hide in the shadows, while Nephi's would act as bait. Then, when the time was right, Sonny would stealthily approach and finish the fight with a precise strike of the azure blade. He was wondering if that was what being in the main hero's party felt like. To anyone else, maybe with the exception of Castor, dancing around deadly awakened beast would have been a tall task, most likely ending with the dancer's death. Nephi's, however, had managed to do it over and over, again seemingly without too much strain. What's more, her performance was based solely on skill, with no ability involved. In that regard, even Castor couldn't have done better. She was swift, calm, and precise. Every move she made was calculated and perfectly timed. She seemed to innately understand the flow and logic of combat, which gave her the ability to roughly predict what actions the mindless beasts would perform in the next seconds. Then it was just the question of physical prowess to evade and even manipulate them to a certain degree. Sunny had always known that skill and experience were more important than raw power, but by watching Nephi's, he vividly understood just how vast the difference between them was, even though his divine aspect allowed Sunny to exert more strength and speed than Changing Star. In an actual fight, he would never stand a chance. Of course, he was also an important part of every encounter. His role as the finisher was not trivial, and not just anybody would have been able to accomplish 4 kills with 4 strikes. Even though Sunny was not taught any elaborate techniques, he was still a somewhat experienced fighter. He had good physical coordination, combat intuition, and most importantly, a cool-headed mentality, not to mention the fact that they were only able to ambush the scavengers so effectively due to his shadow scouting them out in advance. All in all, it was an almost equal cooperation. Still, watching Nephi's fight was nothing short of sobering. Trying not to get too dejected, Sunny summoned the runes. Shadow fragments, 221000. 8 fragments today, pretty excellent. Currently, they were waiting on the edge of the labyrinth path leading directly to the giant statue of the Headless Knight. There was a group of scavengers between them and the statue, moving past without any haste. The sunset was near, but they still had time. Slowly, minutes flowed by. At some point, Nephi's gave the command to move, helping Cassie along. Sunny followed Changing Star and quickly traversed the open space between the labyrinth and the statue. Now they only had to get on top of it. However, it wasn't that easy. Scaling the 200-meter-tall monument would have been hard in normal circumstances, but now they also had to somehow pull Cassie up. Leaving her behind until they were at the top would not have been safe. In the end, Nephi's and Sunny took turns pulling the rope every 20 meters or so. Cassie would hold onto the rocks and wait until they climbed higher, and then the process would repeat. It was slow and torturous, and by the end, Sunny's muscles were sore and almost on fire. But they managed to get to safety before the dark waters washed them away. As the night began to descend, the 3 sleepers sat in the center of the circular stone platform and rested. As they did not bring any materials to make a fire and it was already too late, there was no way to cook food. They ended up chewing on the strips of dried meat, passing the bottle of limitless water around. After some time, Nephi's gave Sunny a sign to take out the spoils of today's journey. He took out the 4 shimmering soul shards and put them on the ground without any discussion. Changing Star moved 2 crystals in his direction and took 2 for herself. Then she gave one of hers to Kasha. Sunny watched it in silence. By the time Nephi's and Cassie had absorbed their soul shards, he still didn't make a move to take his. After a while, he took another crystal out of the rucksack and moved all 3 to Nephi's. The silver-haired girl looked at him with surprise. "Don't you want to grow stronger?" Sunny grinned. "Of course I do, but these won't do me much good right now. It's no secret that you are the main fighting force of our group." He sighed. "The stronger you are, the better our chances of survival will get. Plus, it's not a gift, it's a trade." Nephi's raised an eyebrow. "A trade? What do you want?" Sunny deliberated for a few seconds before answering. "It's rather simple. I will give you these soul shards and all other soul shards I earn on the way to that castle." Then he looked her in the eyes and said, "In return, you will teach me how to fight." Chapter 42. Essence of Combat. Nephi's looked at him and contemplated. This time she remained silent, longer than usual. Sunny felt a bit nervous under her gaze, knowing that he was being evaluated. With Changing Star's skill and insight, it wasn't hard to imagine just how much she had gleaned from his battle performance. Both his current level and future potential must have been pretty much laid bare in front of her. Were they enough to make teaching him worth her while? After some time, she took the soul shards and nodded. "Okay." Sunny smiled, congratulating himself on a successful deal. Not only did he receive a lot while not losing much, but he had also managed to create a bit of a favorable impression of himself in the eyes of Nephi's and Cassie. As Far as performances went, this was a great one. So when do we start? Nephi shrugged. Now. Now Sonny glanced at the sun, which was already almost gone. Were they going to train in complete darkness? It wasn't really an obstacle for him. Changing star, however, we will start with some words. That will be enough for today. After hesitating a little, she added, Cassie, you listen too. Sonny and Kasha turned to Nephi's, listening to her like two obedient students. Despite the fact that their age was more or less similar, both knew that in terms of martial prowess, their companion had authority that was as beyond theirs as a dragon's might was beyond that of a worm. Nephi's thought for a while and then said, Mastery of combat can be divided into two aspects. One is body and the other one is mind. Training the body is not easy, but it is rather simple. All you need is repetition and experience. In a fight, things happen too fast to consider every detail in the moment. That's why your technique must exist. In your muscles and bones, so much so that it almost becomes an instinct. She paused. You can achieve initial results through repetition. Then it must be cemented through experience. The more battle experience you have, the deeper a technique will be assimilated into your body. There is no other way. 1,000 hours of training won't be as impactful as one real fight. Only those who survive countless battles can be truly in command of the body. That simultaneously made a lot of sense and no sense at all. On the one hand, the principle of improving through practice was quite logical. On the other hand, Changing Star's statement made it seem like all those lofty legacies with their years of training were nothing but harmless children. After all, no matter how good their tutors were, they had no real battle experience. But then again, she did wipe the floor with every one of them, excluding Castor with no apparent difficulty, so maybe her statement was true. That, however, posed a question of its own. Just what kind of life had Nephi's led to possess rich battle experience at the tender age of 18? Should I stop calling her princess? Meanwhile, Nephi's continued. Training the mind, however, is not simple at all. That is because once you reach a certain level of skill, the mind is where the true combat takes place. The outcome is often decided before your body begins to move. And to master the mind, the first step is to understand the essence of combat. However, very few people truly do. She looked at them and asked, What do you think that essence is? Sonny hesitated. The essence of combat, what might it be? If it was some other legacy, he would have been tempted to say something stupid like honor, valor, or duty. But he already knew that Nephi's did not fit into the image of a noble aristocrat he had in his mind. She wasn't someone who followed empty words. After a minute or so, Cassie finally answered, Victory. And almost at the same time, Sonny said, Survival. Changing Star shook her head. No. Then she rubbed her neck and pierced them with a cold, fierce gaze. The essence of combat is murder. Cassie flinched and opened her eyes wide. Sonny frowned a little. Nephi's, however, did not seem to care. In the same calm tone, she continued. At the core of it, there is only this. You are trying to kill your opponent, and they are trying to kill you. In the end, one of you will be killed, and the other one will be the killer. Everything else is just noise. Her words sank deep into Sonny's heart and reverberated there, causing something inside of him to resonate and awaken. Style doesn't matter. Weapons don't matter. Reason and intent do not matter. The only thing that matters is to be the last one standing. In this way, anything you do in combat must be viewed as only serving one of two purposes, either to kill your enemy or to prevent the enemy from killing you. Nephi's lowered her eyes. If you can understand that, you will have enough clarity to master the mind. After that, Sonny couldn't fall asleep for a long while. He lay on the cold stone, looking into the darkness and thinking about what Nephi's had taught them. Repetition, experience, clarity. These were the three keys to becoming a fearsome warrior. All three were important, but the last one was the most vexing. Was it really how Changing Star had said? Was there nothing at the core of being a warrior than a cold will to kill? Intuitively, he felt that it was indeed. So this ruthless truth was, in a sense, an amalgamation of all his life experiences. After all, for someone like him, life was nothing but a constant battle for survival. Someone always won and someone always lost. The former got to live for a few more days, the latter, no one cared what happened to them. Of course, life was life and combat was combat. To most people, they weren't one and the same. But what about the awakened? The sole purpose of their existence was to fight against the nightmare creatures. Very few could escape that fate. After coming to the academy, Sonny allowed himself to think that he had escaped the fate of always having to struggle at the edge of survival. But now it seemed like he had just exchanged one battle for another. This was an uncomfortable thought. However, if he looked at it from a different perspective, did it actually mean that he always had a crucial advantage? Most of those chosen by the spell were forced to somehow adjust to this merciless way of life. But he had always lived like this. Was he actually one of the few perfectly suited to be an awakened? With this thought, Sonny fell asleep. In the early morning, he was awakened by a piercing scream. Chapter 43. Repetition, Shadow Slave. Sonny was on his feet even before fully waking up. Somehow Azure Blade was already in his hand. His shadow was hovering beside him, ready to either wrap itself around the sword in case he needed to attack or around his body in case it was already too late for that. He tried to understand what was going on. Nephi's was nearby her, longsword raised in a defensive stance. Cassie. Where's Cassie? Fearing what he might see, giant tentacles reaching for them from the darkness, he looked around. The eastern horizon was just beginning to show the first hints of dawn, adding a tiny shade of gray to the blackness of the world. In that blackness, there were no signs of danger. Finally, he saw Cassie. The blind girl was stumbling at the edge of the platform with a horrified expression on her face. With her blonde hair in a mess, she was stretching, her hands out, clearly lost in space. Of course, there were no walls for her to find. The platform was open to the elements, and the only thing waiting for Cassie was a plunge into the dark, tumultuous waters. Before Sonny knew what he was doing, he was already running. That wasn't a very smart thing to do, after all. He did not know what had caused Kasha to scream and if there was some hidden danger nearby. Plus, it was still too dark for Nephi's to see. His sudden lunge could have caused her to lash out with the sword before asking questions. All of these were good reasons to wait and observe first, but in an uncharacteristic and completely irrational manner, Sonny acted before thinking. He caught Cassie moments before she took a step off the platform and, holding her tightly in his arms, dragged the blind girl back. "I got her," Sonny yelled, letting Changing Star know that there was no need to stab him with a sword. And then in a quiet voice, he said to Cassie, "I got you, it's all right, everything is fine, calm down." He felt the girl's body trembling and looked around again, trying to understand what had scared her so much, but there was nothing. Nephi's was listening to the sea for the same reason. After a few seconds, she asked, "Do you see anything?" Sonny helplessly shook his head. No. He helped Cassie sit down in the center of the platform. While Nephi stood guard above them, he looked the blind girl over to make sure that there were no wounds on her body. Everything seemed to be fine. "She's not hurt anywhere." Changing Star looked down. Although her face remained indifferent, he could tell that she was a bit flustered. After a second or two, she asked in something that might have been her version of a calming tone. It sounded pretty much exactly the same as usual. "Cassie, what happened?" Magically, that did seem to calm the blind girl down a little, at least enough for her to speak in a quivering voice. Cassie extended one hand and pointed down. The head I saw, oh gods." Sonny frowned and looked at Nephi's. Did she see a vision, the past? The tall girl was silent for a moment. "I don't know, it never happened before." Both of them turned to Cassie, not sure what to do. Since there was no apparent danger around, they took turns trying to calm the horrified girl down. However, after that one sentence, she fell quiet and refused to speak again. Nothing seemed to help. After a while, Nephi sighed. "Let's leave her be for now. Maybe she needs time." Sonny was about to retort, but truth be told, he didn't have any ideas either. In the end, he just nodded. "Okay, I'll keep an eye on her." Changing Star, however, had other ideas. As the sun was rising and the surging sea was receding, Nephi's chose to give Cassie some space and led Sonny to the edge of the platform. However, she made sure to always have the blind girl in the periphery of her vision. Kasha sat hugging her knees. Her eyes were closed, but small tremors that periodically ran through her body betrayed that she was awake. Sonny's eye twitched. "Are you sure it's okay to leave her like this?" Nephi's gave him a complicated look. "Yes." Then after some thought, she added, "Cassie is strong." Sonny wasn't sure how to answer. If Changing Star considered someone to be strong, then they most likely were. However, strong was the last word. That came to his mind when he thought about the delicate, beautiful blind girl. Wasn't she someone who constantly needed their help? But then again, there were different kinds of strength. Kasha was still alive. and sane despite her debilitating flaw. How many people could have done the same? If you say so. Then Nephi's made him summon the Azure Blade. After studying it for while, she nodded and took her longsword out of the air. Despite its size, it was an elegant weapon. The narrow, double-edged blade was much longer than that of the Azure Blade, with an incredibly sharp, symmetrical tip, the whole blade as well as the simple cross-shaped guard, and the pommel seemed to be made out of silver and reflected the pale morning light. The handle was tightly wrapped in black leather. Putting the two swords side by side, Nephi spoke. Your sword can be used with one hand, but its true potential can only be revealed when held in both. It is created primarily for cutting and severing, hence the higher center of gravity. However, it can thrust as well. Then she gestured to hers. My sword is a bit more versatile. It is created for both cutting and thrusting, and it has a double edge. However, the principle of wielding these two swords is the same. She took the sword in both hands, placing one near the guard and another near the pommel. Then she performed a downward slash. They are both leverage-based weapons. When held with two hands, one hand pushes. She pushed the sword down with the hand near the guard, while the other hand pulls. The hand near the pommel simultaneously pulled the handle up, giving the blade a tremendous boost in speed. This is how you generate force and perform powerful strikes. Now your turn. Sonny looked at his sword and gripped it with both hands, mimicking Nephi's pose. Then he raised it and slashed down, making sure to enhance the force of the strike with his lower hand. Changing Star observed him. You need to understand that a strike doesn't come from the hands. It comes from your whole body. Power comes from your feet, your hips, your core, your shoulders, and is only then transmitted to your hands. Like this. She demonstrated the downward slash again. This time, Sonny paid attention to the overall stance and movements of every part of changing Star's body as opposed to only the sword. He wasn't a novice to fighting. Instinctively, he already knew how to deliver a proper punch, even if before there wasn't a lot of strength in his body. The principles of striking with a sword were largely the same, so Sonny quickly understood the overall concept. He performed the simple downward slash a few more times. After each time, Nephi's gave him pointers and corrected his mistakes. Some time later, she was finally satisfied with his form. Good. Sonny smiled, proud of his achievements. Nephi's looked at him thoughtfully and nodded. Now do it 1,000 more times. The smile froze on Sonny's face. 1,000? Did she say 1,000? He blinked. Sorry. How many times? Changing Star tilted her head and thought for some time. Well, we don't have much time today, so yes, only 1,000. Ha ha ha, only 1,000, eh? Sonny forced himself to sound polite. I see. All right. As Nephi's walked back to sit with Cassie, he turned to the sea and raised his sword. 1. The Azure Blade whistled as it cut the air. He raised it again. 2. Push and pull. This is how you generate force. 3. Strike with your whole body, not just your hands. 4. As Sonny raised his sword and slashed down, over and over again, only one thought eventually remained in his mind. Repetition, experience, clarity. Repetition. By the time he was done performing 1,000 strikes, Cassie was finally ready to speak. Chapter 44, Cassie's Dream Shadow Slave. With pretty much every muscle in his body sore, Sonny walked over to the girls and fell on the ground. After catching his breath, he looked at Kasha. Cassie, do you feel better? Several seconds later, the blind girl slowly nodded. That's a relief. He shifted and hesitated for a bit. Kasha didn't look too well. Her face was still very pale with a distant, dazed expression on it. Her body at least was no longer trembling. Sonny wasn't very good at talking to people, let alone placating them. He wasn't sure what to say. He cast a gaze at Nephi's and sighed inwardly. Who knew that one day he would turn out to be the most sociable person for as far as the eye could see? What a joke. Can I have some water? Cassie turned to him and scowled, as though confused by the question. Then she suddenly gasped and opened her eyes wide. Oh, sorry, yes, of course. She summoned the limitless water bottle and offered it to Sonny. He took it with a grateful smile and greedily drank a few gulps before giving the bottle to Nephi's. Eventually, it returned to Cassie. You drink some too. After she did, he awkwardly patted the blind girl on the shoulder. Everything seems to be fine now. Did you dream of another vision? You can tell us. If you want. Cassie hesitated for a bit before saying, I don't know, maybe it was just a nightmare. Sonny and Nephi's exchanged glances. They both doubted that what Cassie saw was a simple nightmare. After all, people usually did not dream in the dream realm. The blind girl, meanwhile, continued. I don't really remember, it's all in fragments. Sonny carefully considered his words, not wanting to pressure Cassie too much. You can just tell us what you remember. Maybe we'll be able to make sense of it together. Kasia sighed and tentatively nodded. After a long pause, she finally found the courage to speak. At first, I saw a boundless darkness locked behind 7 seals. Something vast was churning in the darkness. I felt like if I directly saw it, I would lose my mind. As I watched terrified, the seals broke one after another until only one remained, and then that seal broke too. She trembled a little. After that, I don't know. It was as though my mind shattered into 1,000 shards, each shard reflecting its own image. Most of them were dark and scary, some I have already forgotten, the other. Cassie fell silent, remembering. I saw the human castle again. Only this time it was at night. There was a lonely star burning in the black skies, and under its light the castle was suddenly consumed by fire, with rivers of blood flowing down its halls. I saw a corpse in a golden armor sitting on a throne, a woman with a bronze spear drowning in a tide of monsters, an archer trying to pierce the falling sky with his arrows. Finally, she looked up, her face full of horror. In the end, I saw a colossal, terrifying crimson spire. At its base, 7 severed heads were guarding 7 locks, and at the top, a dying angel was being consumed by hungry shadows. When I saw the angel bleed, I suddenly felt as though something so precious that it can't be described with words was taken from me. Her voice became quieter. Then I felt so much sorrow, pain, and rage that what little remained of my sanity seemed to disappear. That was when I woke up, I think. Nephise and Sonny remained silent for a while, trying to make sense of what Cassie had told them. Even if Nephise had an idea, she didn't show it. Sonny, however, was totally lost. He couldn't even begin to decipher the hidden meaning behind the vision, if it even was one. Previously, Cassia's vision about the castle was pretty much straightforward. It showed her a human fortress and even the direction which it was situated. This time, however, her dream was disjointed, full of weird symbolism and vague, uncertain images, much more like a charlatan's prophecy than a vision gained through an aspect ability. Finally, he sighed. Maybe it actually was just a nightmare. Your previous visions weren't like this, right? Cassie silently shook her head. Sonny scratched the back of his head. Well, people don't usually dream in the dream realm, but you do. Perhaps seeing a random nightmare once in a while is a side effect of your ability. The blind girl turned to him, a faint relief written on her face. You really think so? He hesitated, trying to find the right words. Why not? It's a possibility. Inwardly, however, he felt uneasy. A dying angel being consumed by shadows? Why does it sound so ominous? I should try and stay away from angels in the future. Gee, what has become of my life? A sentence like that doesn't even sound insane anymore. With that, they were finally ready to welcome a new day. Sometime later, they were sitting on the western edge of the stone platform, looking at the scavengers below. Sonny's shadow was busy scouting a path to the next high landmark. Were there always that many? Sonny glanced at Nephise and shook his head. No, there were much more. They seem to be almost done with the carcass. I doubt it will last until nightfall, which meant that by tomorrow, all these beasts would be roaming the labyrinth, making it hard for the 3 sleepers to make any progress. It would be best to leave today and put some distance between themselves and the horde before the scavengers were done with their feast. However, without scouting a path in advance, there was a chance of not making it to safety in time. Both options were risky. Nephise frowned, seemingly thinking the same. After a while, she said, I don't want Cassie to spend another night near this statue. Let's leave. Now, Sonny thought for a while, then opened his mouth to offer his own opinion. However, a sudden commotion below prevented him from speaking. Down at the bottom of the disappearing sea, amidst mounds of broken coral, the carcass of the giant shark-like monster, the remaining half of it, to be precise, was almost stripped of meat. And between its white bones, something was shimmering in the mud, 2 extremely large, luminescent crystals. Sonny's eyes widened. Are those? Yes, shards of 2 transcendent soul cores. Transcendent, 2 of them. Suddenly, he was simultaneously filled with greed and fear. Greed because of how rare and precious transcendent soul shards were. Fear because the giant shark turned to be a corrupted devil at least. One corrupted devil, if not stopped by a saint or a large number of awakened, could potentially destroy an entire city. Sonny belatedly realized that he was much closer to death on that first night than he had previously. Thought, should we wait and listen? He stared at Nephi's and then obediently listened to the distant, barely audible clamor of the scavengers. After a while, he noticed some disharmony in it. Nephi's suddenly tensed up. There. She pointed in the direction of the labyrinth. After concentrating on it, Sonny was finally able to notice two massive shadows stepping out of a particularly wide passage. A second later, the creatures casting those shadows appeared in sight. Sonny gulped. Damn. The monsters looked like the scavengers, but not quite. To start with, they were much larger, towering above the surroundings at more than 3 meters of height. Their carapace seemed to be thicker. It was colored in deep black and scarlet, like an ancient armor drenched in blood. Here and there, vicious-looking spikes were growing out of the carapace, making their every move much more dangerous. Additionally, instead of heavy pincers, their upper arms ended with long, curved, terrifying bone scythes. Sonny felt cold sweat running down his spine. What the hell are those things? Nephi's tilted her head. Monsters, I guess. Nightmare creatures with one soul core were called beasts. They were dangerous and strong, but mindless. If they were able to develop or were created with a second core, they became monsters. Monsters were much more devastating and possessed some rudimentary, warped form of intelligence. They were the next step in a nightmare beast's evolution, and these two seemed to be bigger, deadlier versions of carapace. Scavengers. Sonny and Nephi's watched as the two monsters approached the carcass. The scavengers were visibly afraid of them, rushing to get out of the way. Those who were too slow were mercilessly thrown to the side or cut apart. By the bone scythes, rivers of azure blood were flowing into the mud. What are they doing? Did they come to absorb the soul shards? Finally, the monsters reached the carcass. Each of them took one of the shards. However, instead of absorbing them, they simply turned around and carried the precious crystals away. The scavengers made way, following the shards with their little hungry eyes. Sonny blinked and looked at Nephi's. Do we still leave now? Changing Star frowned and hesitated. A few moments later, she shook her head. No, we'll go tomorrow. Then she turned west and observed the retreating monsters. Get your shadow to follow these two back. Chapter 45, Sound of Laughter. Because of the shadow fragments Sonny had absorbed in the last few days, the range of shadow control has increased a little. However, it was still far from being enough to explore deep into the labyrinth. He only got the general direction in which the two large monsters were moving. They were going west. After telling this to Nephi's, there was pretty much nothing else for him to do. In the end, Sonny decided to simply rest. The next day was promising to be full of hardships and danger, so it was in his best interest to let his body recover as much as it could. Sometime later, Sonny was lying on his back, staring at the gray sky. Cassie was sitting beside him, lost in her thoughts. Nephi's was meditating. At least that's what it looked like. She might as well have been asleep for all Sonny knew. After a while, Cassie turned to him. Sonny. He tilted his head to look at her. Yeah. The blind girl hesitated. Do you think we'll be able to return home? Sonny glanced at her and furrowed his brow. A few seconds later, he turned away and looked at the sky again. Sure. Cassie smiled. You really think so? Why? What's with all these questions? He sighed and tried to find the right words. Because of her. He pointed at Nephi's, knowing that Cassie won't see it. There was no one else on the stone platform, though, so it was pretty obvious who he was referring to. I'm also not someone to die easily. In fact, I'm willing to bet that you couldn't have found a better duo of sleepers to escort you across the dream realm. If anyone can survive this, it's us. So yeah, I think that our chances of making it back are pretty high. Cassie suddenly giggled. Aren't you a little too full of yourself? You were in the second to last place. Sonny shrugged. That's only because someone smart told me to keep a low profile. Otherwise, I would have ranked higher. Then with a grin, he added, much higher. Third to last, at least. The blind girl couldn't help but laugh. The melodic sound of her laughter made Sonny feel much better. He had not heard anything like that ever since coming to the dream realm. It was nice to see that people were still able to preserve a bit of mirth even in this hellish place. Come to think of it, this was the first time he heard Cassie laugh at all. Back in the academy, she was always dull and bleak. After this sudden outburst, Cash's expression slowly turned wistful. A few seconds later, she asked, what do you miss the most about home? Sonny tried to think of something, but failed. He wasn't sure that he even had a home in the real world. The tiny room he had been renting previously was nothing but a temporary shelter from the rain. As for the real world as a whole, his life there wasn't that pleasant either. Finally, he said, "I don't particularly miss anything." Cassie was very surprised. "Really? Don't you miss your family?" Sonny smiled. "I don't have a family. Well, I guess I have a sister somewhere. But we haven't seen each other in many years." "Oh." The blind girl fell silent. Several seconds later, she said quietly, "I miss my family the most." There was longing and sadness in her voice. Sonny didn't know what to say, so he stayed silent. "Mom and Dad must be really worried about me right now." "No, no. Actually, they wouldn't be worried. They would be heartbroken. They must think that I'm as well as dead already." Sonny glanced at her and sighed. "You seem to care about them a lot." Cassie turned to him in confusion. "Of course, isn't it normal?" Sonny stared at the gray sky. The wind smelled of rain. After a while, he said, "I wouldn't know." In the evening, Nephi's made Sonny perform the 1,000 strikes again. After that, they ate the last strips of dried scavenger meat and took turns, sleeping so that one of them could always keep an eye on Cassie. Thankfully, nothing happened during the night. When the morning came and the dark sea retreated, they prepared to leave. The giant statue. Nephi's was the first one to climb down. Before that, she had a few words to say. "Today will be different from before. There will be much more scavengers. Roaming in the labyrinth, we might not be able to create an ambush or avoid, fighting several of them at once." She looked at Sonny. "If anything happens, your job is to bring Cassie away. We can retreat by using passages that are too narrow for the scavengers. If we get separated, proceed to the high point by yourselves. Don't wait for me. Do you understand?" With a somber expression, he gave her a nod. Nephi's returned it. "Good. Time is of the essence, so let's go." With that, she began the descent. After Nephi's reached a point 20 or so meters below them, she found purchase and waited. Using the golden rope, Sonny lowered Cassie down. Just like while climbing up, they took turns, helping the blind girl. Luckily, climbing down the statue was much easier. Soon, they reached the ground. Entering the labyrinth, the trio moved forward with haste. The shadow was ahead of them, scouting for monsters and optimal paths. Despite that, their progress was slow and chaotic. They had to constantly change direction to avoid groups of scavengers, often ending up in dead ends or moving away from their destination. Sonny, who played the role of the scout and navigator, felt his brain slowly starting to boil. At some point, however, they inevitably ended up in a situation where a fight was unavoidable. There was a large group of scavengers at their heels and a pair of them blocking the path ahead. Neither of the two groups had noticed the sleepers. Yet, however, since there were no other passages to turn into, it was only a matter of time. Nephi's considered their options for a few seconds. There was a scowl on her face. Finally, she said, "If there's only two, we can take them." Sonny looked at her with uncertainty in his eyes. "But there's no time to set up an ambush." He wasn't quite sure how they could fight two scavengers at once. Despite how good of a teacher Nephi's was, he only practiced with the sword for a day. Facing against a scavenger alone was risky. Changing Star shrugged. "It's almost the same. I'll attack first. You follow behind in the shadows and finish one off once they turn. Then we kill the second one together." The whole plan was based on the assumption that Nephi's could survive under the onslaught of two scavengers, both attacking her simultaneously. Sonny was very impressed by her prowess, but he wasn't sure that it was possible. There was a large probability that Nephi's would die. He still remembered that she wasn't present in Cassie's first vision. But what else could they do? A bit rattled, Sonny gritted his teeth. "All right." After a short pause, Nephi summoned her sword. Then she stepped forward. Chapter 46, Experience Shadow Slave. After finding a good hiding spot for Cassie, Sonny and Nephi's proceeded forward to face the scavengers. Soon they saw two hulking silhouettes in the distance. With her lips pursed together, Nephi's threw over her shoulder, "Keep up." Then, like a runner preparing for a race, she got down on one knee, inhaled deeply, and lunged forward. "Damn." Sonny dove into the deep shadow cast by the wall of the labyrinth and followed, running as fast as he could. However, the distance between them kept growing. Suddenly, he remembered walking behind Nephi's as they crossed the bridge to the academy. Was it his fate to always follow behind her? Changing Star's running speed was incredibly fast. She was practically flying through the air like an arrow let loose from a bow. One of her arms was stretched backward, holding the sword with its point to the ground. The Other was cutting the air with each stride. It took the two scavengers a couple of seconds to realize what was happening after noticing her. By that time, she was almost upon them, with madness burning in their eyes and viscous saliva dripping from their mandibles. The monsters screeched and charged forward. Nephise did not. Slowed down, as though planning to ram them with her body. Sunny's heart skipped a bit. 4 terrifying pincers shot through the air. At the last moment, Nephise fell backward, falling on her side. The inertia carried her forward as she slid through the mud, passing between the scavengers. Then she twisted her body and stopped herself by plunging the sword into the ground. A bit slower, and she would have been impaled by one of the scavengers. Legs crazy. She's crazy. By the time Changing Star got back to her feet, one of the scavengers had already turned around. However, Sunny couldn't see what was going on as his sight was blocked by the bulky carapace creatures. He only heard the sound of chitin striking against steel. There was no time to worry about that anyway, since he had his own problems to solve. Due to the insane maneuver that Nephise had pulled off, the second scavenger lagged a little behind the first one. It was just about to turn around when Sunny finally got close enough to launch an attack. Silently cursing, he ran up a narrow protrusion on the coral wall and jumped, aiming to pierce the weak point at the scavenger's back from above. His shadow was already wrapped around the azure blade. But at the last moment, the scavenger suddenly moved, slightly turning its torso to the right. The blade missed the concave spot where the armor plates connected and instead hit one of them square in the center, sliding helplessly across adamantine chitin. Crap! Instead of killing the beast with one decisive blow, Sunny ended up dealing no damage at all. What's worse, he landed right on top of the scavenger, practically hugging it from behind. In the next moment, the scavenger shook its carapace, throwing the irritating human off. Sunny flew sideways and crashed into the labyrinth wall, feeling breath being knocked out of him. Suffocating and disoriented, he fell gracelessly into the mud. Not good. By some instinct, Sunny rolled to the side. Something tore past him and hit the wall, sending pieces of crimson coral flying through the air. Then he was lifted into the air and thrown backward. But by that time, however, he had already come to his senses. Twisting his body, Sunny managed to land on his feet and take a few steps back without falling. In the next second, his sword was in front of him, held in both hands, just like Nephise had taught him. The scavenger was already charging at him with a menacing fire burning in its eyes. Repetition. Experience. The shadow flowed from the azure blade to his hand, then spread to his arm, shoulder, and then finally covered his whole body. Sunny instantly felt stronger, faster, more resilient, but was it enough? No. To survive, he would definitely also need some luck. One pincer flew at him from the right, the other from the left. There was no time to retreat or dodge sideways. So instead, Sunny did something that made every instinct in his body scream in protest. He jumped forward, closing the distance to the charging monster. The pincers clashed together with a loud crack behind his back. Instinct or not, it was the only logical step. After all, the attack range of his sword was much shorter than that of the scavenger. He could only fight back by getting close. Before the beast had time to react, Sunny did what he had recently done thousands of times. His muscles moved even before his mind gave the command. With one fluid motion, he raised the sword over his head and slashed downward, pushing with one hand while pulling with the other. His whole body moved in concert to deliver a powerful blow. The azure blade whistled as it cut the air. Then it hit the joint of one of the scavenger's front legs and cleaved right through it, severing the limb entirely. Blue blood sprayed everywhere. Sunny had less than a second to be amazed. I actually did it. But there was no time to be distracted. Due to the loss of its front leg, the scavenger lost balance for a moment, careening forward and down. However, he had 7 other legs. This wasn't going to last long. Coincidentally, though, at this exact moment, his other front leg slid in the mud, bringing the monster even further down. Sunny did not waste this chance. Taking a step forward, he thrust the azure blade up, pushing it into the scavenger's mouth. A severed mandible fell to the ground as the monster impaled itself on the sword with its own weight. The massive body of the nightmare creature convulsed before falling still. It was dead. Sunny slowly exhaled, only now feeling the pain in his chest and at the back of his head. He carefully touched it and grimaced. His hand came back, wet with blood. At least I'm alive. You have slain an awakened beast, carapace scavenger. You shadow grows stronger. You have. With no time to listen to the spell, Sunny tugged on the sword to dislodge it from the monster's head and hurried to help Nephi's. However, it was too late. The other scavenger was lying in the mud, clearly dead. His limbs were still twitching, indicating that the fatal blow was delivered just moments ago. It seemed like Nephi's had managed to sever its spine by piercing the weak spot at the base of the beast's torso with her longsword. He couldn't see the silver-haired girl behind the bulky carcass. As Sunny approached it, he heard the sound of rugged, strained breathing. Then a shaky voice came from behind the scavenger. Don't come any closer." In the deathly silence of the battle's aftermath, Changing Star's voice sounded strange and subdued. Sunny suddenly felt as though someone had squeezed his heart in a fist. Steeling himself, he took another step forward. Nephi's was standing in front of the dead scavenger, trying to catch her breath after the intense fight. There was a bloody gash on her shoulder. However, it didn't look life-threatening. Sunny's attention, though, was instantly drawn to something else. It seemed that at some point during the fight, the tall girl's makeshift seaweed top came apart, leaving her naked above the waist. She was covering her chest with one arm. Behind the arm squished the supple fullness of her. Sunny flinched as though someone had stung him and hurriedly turned. Around, his face was burning. Without thinking about it, he even made his shadow look away. An awkward silence followed. After some time, Sunny forced himself to speak. Are you all right?" Nephi's was slow to answer. "Yes." Good. I'll go fetch Cassie then." "All right." Feeling as though an army of monsters was chasing him, he walked forward, on stiff legs, and then quickened his step, barely holding himself from running. It's her fault. She should have communicated things clearer. Trying to get the vivid image out of his head, Sunny hurried to the place where Cassie was waiting for them. By the time they returned, Nephi's had already fixed her top and was wearing it as though nothing had happened. However, Sunny couldn't help but feel that the look she gave him was somewhat weird. "Forget it." After checking the wound on his head, Changing Star said, "It's just a bleeder, nothing serious. Tell me if you feel dizzy and nauseous, or have a strong headache, though." Since Sunny had none of these symptoms, he kept quiet. Nephi's looked down at his clothes and sighed. Memory. He opened his mouth to say no, but then fell silent. Come to think of it, when he killed the scavenger, the spell did say something else after informing him about the absorbed shadow fragments. At the time, he was too busy to pay it any attention. "Let me check." He summoned runes and quickly found the cluster representing his memories, silver bell, puppeteer's shroud, azure blade. Nothing new. Then what was the spell talking about? Suddenly, he noticed a new set of runes in the neighboring cluster. His eyes widened. Echo's Carapace Scavenger. Chapter 47, Echo Shadow Slave. Echo, it's an echo. Sunny couldn't believe his eyes. Echoes were an extremely rare type of reward that Awakened could receive. After slaying nightmare creatures, chances of getting one were very low. The real world, an echo could be sold for an unimaginable amount of money. That's because they were much more precious than memories. Without delaying it much further, he dove into his sea of soul. There, very few things had changed. A lonely black sun was still hanging above the calm, silent waters. It was orbited by spheres of light that represented his memories. This time there were 3 of them. Just like before, Sunny couldn't get rid of the feeling that something was stealthily moving just beyond the periphery of his vision. However, this time he didn't pay it any attention. He wanted to see his echo. It too was represented by a sphere of light. However, this sphere was much larger and hovered further away from the shadow core. With a thought, he commanded it to descend. The sphere slowly floated down and touched the dark water. As Sunny came closer, walking on the surface of the sea, its radiance slowly faded away, revealing the monster contained within. A hulking, menacing carapace scavenger was calmly standing in front of him. There was no madness in its eyes, or any feeling at all, for that matter. After all, it wasn't really alive. It was just an echo. Shining runes appeared in the air around the scavenger. Echo, Carapace Scavenger. Echo type, Beast. Echo core, Awakened. Echo attributes, Strong, Armored. Echo description, a cursed soldier of the Fallen Legion. Before Sunny knew it, a wide grin appeared on his face. That scavenger was now his. It could be summoned and used to fight against his enemies, carry heavy cargo, or perform other tasks. What's more, it was a whole rank above its master, which meant that it was much stronger, more resilient, and fearsome than a dreamer with a dormant core should normally possess. With this echo by their side, many things would become easier. Following an impulse, Sonny raised a hand and brushed it against cold. Black chitin, he just wanted to touch his new possession. However, the moment his palm touched the scavenger, a strange thing happened. The soul of sea suddenly surged a little, and a new set of runes appeared, transform Echo into a shadow. Sonny flinched and snatched his hand back. What the hell is that about? He had never heard anything about transforming echoes into something else, let alone shadows. Then again, he had never heard about shad cores and fragments, too. It seems my aspect holds more secrets than I thought. Sonny licked his lips and hesitated. Then he cautiously said, yes. However, nothing happened. A moment later, the runes changed. Not enough shadow fragments to perform a transformation. Shadow fragments required, 24,100. He frowned, disappointed. I see, so there is another use for the fragments. They can either enhance my own core or do something weird to echoes. How do I know which use is more beneficial without knowing what a transformation actually does? An echo was plenty useful by itself. Sonny felt that it would be wiser to concentrate on strengthening himself, at least for now. I'll experiment with it later. With that, he left the Sea of Soul. Since he had spaced out for quite a bit, Nephi's was looking at him with a silent question in her eyes. Sonny grinned. I got an echo. Her pupils slightly widened. Cassie, on the other hand, was more expressive. An echo? You actually got an echo? Yes. Since the larger group of monsters was now minutes away from catching up. With them, Sonny didn't waste any time and summoned the scavenger. The hulking beast immediately appeared in front of him, seemingly sown together from tiny sparks of light. Soon, its black chitin became fully corporeal. Following Sonny's command, it shifted a little and raised its mighty pincers. Nephi's observed the echo with an unreadable expression. Then, a corner of her lips slightly curled up. Good. Sonny looked at her with a smile. I think we can task it with carrying Cassie. Outside of battle, it will help us the most. The blind girl's mouth fell open. Carry me like a mount. He chuckled and slapped the scavenger on its carapace. This bad boy can fit a petite girl like you with no problem at all. Trust me. I've been clambering these things a lot for the past few days. It's actually quite spacious on top of them, especially if they're not trying to kill you. Cassie hesitated. Well, okay, if you think it's for the best. Sonny and Nephi's helped the blind girl to climb on top of the echo. Then, they used the golden rope to create makeshift reins for Cassie to hold on to. After quickly retrieving soul shards from the dead scavengers, the sleepers hastily left the passage, narrowly avoiding another battle. With Cassie riding comfortably atop the scavenger, their overall speed dramatically increased. Sonny and Nephi's were jogging in the front, hoping to recoup the time lost in the first half of the day and reach the high point. With an hour or two to spare, from time to time, they had to take detours to avoid fighting groups of carapace monsters. However, with a monster of their own by their side, the mood and mental state of the three sleepers were much better. For the first time since coming to this place, Sonny felt somewhat calm. Of course, this calmness didn't last long. At some point, he noticed that the wind had picked up a bit. Almost. Simultaneously, Cassie asked them to stop. Nephi's and Sonny looked at her with deep frowns. It seemed that they both had a bad premonition. What is it? The blind girl let go of the reins. Do you hear anything? They looked at each other, then shook their heads. No, why? Cassie scowled. Help me get off this thing. After they helped her, she stood motionless for a while, listening. Her scowl deepened. Then the blind girl cautiously kneeled and put her ear to the ground. What do you hear? Cassie licked her lips. It's murmuring. Suddenly, a drop of water fell on Sonny's face. He raised his head and looked at the sky. Their dark, stormy clouds were gathering with unnatural speed. Soon they were bound to cover it completely, including the sun. And when that happened, his eyes widened. Chapter 48, The Storm's Shadow Slave. We need to move now. As Nephi's turned to him, Sonny grabbed Cassie and helped her stand up. His face was even paler than usual, and there was a panicked look in his eyes. Now, help me get her back on the scavenger. The silver-haired girl raised her head and looked at the sky. Soon her expression darkened. Without saying anything, she did as he had asked. Cassie seemed a bit disoriented. She grabbed the reins and helplessly turned. To her friend, Neph, what is going on? Changing Star glanced at her. When she eventually spoke, her voice sounded heavy. A storm is coming. Meanwhile, Sonny sent his shadow to climb on top of a tall pillar of coral and looked ahead, trying to understand how far the cliffs they were aiming for were. From the look of it, there was still a considerable distance to go. However, the giant statue was already much further away. Going back now would have been suicide. He turned to Nephi's. We're about 3 or 4 kilometers away from the cliffs. Do you think we can make it? She scowled. If we take the most direct route, maybe. Sunny hesitated, then asked, what about the monsters? Changing Star looked ahead and gritted her teeth. We'll have to cut through. That's it, that's the plan. As he was fruitlessly trying to come up with some devious trick to save. Then Nephi's turned her head and glanced at him, puzzled. What are you waiting for? Run. As they darted forward, heavy drops of rain were starting to fall on the ground. Strong winds were howling between the coral blades, sending bits of mud and seaweed flying. With storm clouds gathering in the sky, sunlight dimmed and a cold twilight descended upon the labyrinth. Sunny was running with all his might, as though his life depended on it. Because it actually did. He was leading their small group, choosing the straightest path toward the cliffs with the help of his shadow. Nephi's was a step behind him. The scavenger carrying Cassie was stomping through the mud with its 8 legs in the back, without the need to avoid monsters and death breathing down their necks. They moved with amazing speed. Side passages and crimson walls were flashing past them in a blur. There was no need to hold back and conserve strength for the long run. If they were late to reach the cliffs by a minute, their lives would be over. They had to give it their all. Sunny was ready to fight a series of bloody skirmishes all along the way. But to his surprise, the inhabitants of the labyrinth did not give them much trouble. The scavengers seemed to be as panicked as they were. The bulky beasts were busy trying to hide inside the coral mounds or burrowing underground. On the rare occasions when one of them showed aggression, a quick slash of the sword or a threatening clack of a pincer was enough to make the monster change its mind. However, no matter how fast they were moving, the storm was faster. The rain quickly turned into a pelting downpour, each drop becoming a torrent. The winds grew in strength, striking against their bodies with enough force to make them stumble. The light dimmed even further, reducing visibility to almost zero. Finally, a blinding bolt of lightning tore through the darkness, followed almost immediately by a deafening thunderclap. In the next moment, the ground under Sunny's feet trembled, causing him to lose balance and fall. He rolled in the mud and tried to stand up, but slipped and fell again. Someone's arm grabbed him by the shoulder and helped him rise. In the darkness of the storm, Sunny saw Changing Star's face. She opened her mouth and shouted, "Don't stop, run." He almost couldn't hear her behind the roaring wind and rain. By the time Sunny began to move, the dark, salty water was already as high as his shins. He gritted his teeth. The sea was coming back. He couldn't determine where the water was coming from, but with each minute it was rising higher. Soon it was up to his knee, then up to his waist, making running almost impossible. The speed of the group slowed down considerably. It was then, in a sudden flash of lightning, when they saw a dark mass of stone ahead. They had made it to the cliffs. Almost at the same time, a terrible rumbling sound came from the depths of the labyrinth. Turning back, Sunny saw a colossal, crushing torrent of black water rushing through the crimson forest. Some distance away, a tardy scavenger was caught by it and thrown against the coral walls. The unbreakable carapace of the mighty creature cracked and burst open like a rotten egg. Curses. He turned to Nephi's. Time is up. Start climbing. She caught him by the arm. Dismiss your echo. Sunny didn't know whether the scavenger could scale the cliff. In any case, Cassie wouldn't have been able to hold on if it did. He helped the blind girl get down and then sent the monster back to the Sea of Soul. Nephi's lowered herself to let Cassie climb on her back, then tied them together with the golden rope. Not wasting any time, she gritted her teeth and stepped forward to grab onto the wet rocks of the cliff wall. They began the ascent, rushing to get as high as possible before the black torrent hit. Some time later, Sunny screamed, "Brace!" In the next moment, a wall of dark water hit the rocks mere meters beneath their feet. As Sunny held for dear life, the whole cliff shuddered. A few boulders fell from somewhere high above, missing his head only by chance. Somehow all 3 of them were still alive. However, things were far from being over. The black water was still rising, now with frightening speed, threatening to swallow them at any second. They had to keep climbing, and they had to be faster than the surging sea. Sunny cursed as he searched for the next hold to grab onto. To survive, he had to scale the face of the cliff with crazy speed. However, hastily climbing wet rocks was a recipe for disaster. One slip of a hand, and he would plunge down to be crushed against the cliffs, drown, or be eaten by Some giant monster. The torrential rain and hurricane wind made everything even worse. And yet there was no choice. He frantically kept climbing, tearing his skin on sharp rocks, every muscle. In his body was in agony. If not for the shadow wrapped tightly around his body, Sonny would have been long dead. But even with its help, the surging dark water was getting closer and closer. Damn it. Damn it all. No matter how hard Sonny tried, he couldn't win back any distance. Soon, the water was at his feet. The sea slowly swallowed his legs, then his torso. He kept climbing, now fighting against the weight of the water and the force of the tide that was trying to tear him away from the cliff. But it was useless in the end. When the water covered his shoulders, he felt his finger slipping from the wet rocks. Sonny tried to hold on, but the current was too strong. He was pushed away like a weightless toy, losing any purchase. No. ... In the last second, a golden rope fell into the water beside him. Shaken, Sonny grabbed onto it and held with all his strength. The rope drew tight and lifted him out of the water. His feet touched the cliff wall again. Not wasting any time, he resumed climbing with the help of the rope. Finally, a strong hand grabbed him from above and dragged his body over the edge of the cliff. Sonny fell to the ground, struggling to breathe. After some time, he looked at Nephise, who was lying in a similar position to his right, equally as drained. She was still clutching the golden rope in her hand. Cassie was sitting a few steps away from them. He wanted to laugh but had no strength for it. They survived. Chapter 49, Natural Element Shadow Slave. For a few minutes, Sonny simply lay on the ground, letting the rain hit his face. From time to time, a bolt of lightning arced through the skies, drowning everything in blinding light. Other than that, it was almost completely dark. If not for his attribute, he would have had trouble discerning the shapes of Nephise and Cassie, who were resting nearby. After some time, however, a feeling of uneasiness entered his mind. Something was off. Sonny scowled, trying to understand where that feeling was coming from. Finally, he realized that it was his shadow. It was trying to draw his attention to something. Please let me rest, I just want to rest. He was too tired to do anything. Both his body and mind were exhausted. However, the shadow was very persistent. It remained adamant. In the end, Sonny moaned and rolled over on his stomach, then slowly stood up. Nephise turned her head and looked at him. What is it? He grimaced. I don't know yet, something feels wrong. Cassie shivered and got closer to Neph, following his shadow's warning. Sonny looked around, trying to find any sign of danger in their surroundings. Even with his vision, he couldn't see anything out of place. The upper part of the cliffs was well above the stormy sea, forming a small island. Its surface was rugged and uneven, with several protruding ridges breaking the line of sight. There was a large space between their group and the nearest ridge. That space was littered, seemingly at random, with piles of dirt and tall boulders. Nephise got up and summoned her sword. Do you see anything? Sonny frowned. Not really. At that moment, another lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the small island. His eyes widened. The tall boulders surrounding them were massive and irregularly shaped. They were black in color and motionless. That's why Sonny had not recognized them for what they were at first glance. All around them, scavengers were silently lying on the ground. Sonny froze, suddenly consumed by terror. The hairs on the back of his neck bristled and stood up on ends. 1, 2, 3, he lost count because of panic and gritted his teeth. 7, no, 8 of them. It seemed the 3 humans were not the only ones who thought of taking shelter from the dark sea on these cliffs. He trembled. These cliffs were a death trap. Noticing something on his face, Nephise tensed. Sonny. He slowly turned his head to her and whispered, don't speak, don't move, just stay where you are. She followed his instructions without asking for the reason. However, silent question appeared on her face. Cassie did the same. Sonny closed his eyes and breathed in, trying to calm his panicking mind. Down, there were no hopeless situations. Every problem had a solution. He just had to think of one. The scavengers did not attack yet. Maybe they were asleep or patiently waiting out the storm, trying not to move in fear of attracting more terrifying monsters. Maybe they simply did not notice the humans. After all, it was unknown how well these creatures could see. Were they able to see in the dark? Probably not, or at least not as well as he could. There was still hope. Sonny opened his eyes and looked at the small island again, but this time, his perspective was different. He saw the deep darkness, the clamor of the storm that drowned out most of the sounds, the large distance between the scavenger. This was his territory. It was perfectly suited for a murderous shadow. Didn't he dream of becoming a silent assassin? Well, here was his chance. He just had to execute each step perfectly, crawl through the darkness, strike without alerting the enemy, kill each of them with one precise blow. Rinse and repeat. He already knew their strengths and weaknesses, all. That was left was to put that knowledge to practice, and even if he makes a mistake, there were other means to fall back onto. Echo and Nephi's could do their part if he were to land himself in danger. Yes, that could work. It had too. Sonny looked at Changing Star and Cassie. I'll take care of this. Before they could react, he seemed to dissolve into the shadows. Under the cover of darkness, Sonny sneaked forward. His steps were soft, and measured, his breathing controlled. He quickly determined the optimal order of attack to minimize the chance of being discovered and proceeded. To the first target, a hulking scavenger that was the furthest away from the pack. Hidden in the shadows, Sonny suddenly felt calm and focused. He felt as though he was finally in his natural element. As the looming silhouette of the scavenger approached, he slowed down and circled around his target. The monster did not move, oblivious to the lurking threat that was drawing closer with each second. Sonny held his breath and prepared to attack. He only had one chance. Do it right. With that thought, he silently lunged forward. One step, two. Sonny jumped and easily landed on the monster's carapace. The azure blade was already in his hand, its steel dark. A moment later, it plunged into the weak point on the scavenger's back, piercing the chitin and destroying its brain. The quiet crack of the breaking carapace was quickly washed away by the rain. It was done. Sonny felt a sense of triumph appear in his heart and quickly suppressed it. This wasn't the right time to celebrate. 7 targets were still waiting for him in the darkness. He retrieved his sword and jumped down from the scavenger's corpse. Then Sonny frowned. Why was the spell silent? It didn't announce his kill, nor the absorption of the shadow fragments. Feeling his skin crawl, Sonny turned around and looked at the scavenger. At first, he was afraid that the beast was still alive, but that wasn't the case. It was as dead as could be. However, on closer inspection, Sonny noticed something that he had missed. Before, and when he did, his face paled. Chapter 50, Death Trap Shadow Slave. The scavenger was dead. However, it wasn't Sonny's blade that killed it. While circling the target, he was focused on staying unnoticed and not alerting the enemy to his presence before reaching the optimal position for an attack. After that, he only saw the monster's back. That's why he didn't notice the terrible wound that ran from the top of the creature's torso to its segmented legs, obscured by the rain. The unbreakable carapace was cut open like a tin can. The scavenger's flesh and mangled organs could be easily seen through the large gap, oozing azure blood. It streamed down only to be washed away by the storm. Sonny gulped. He might have felt awkward about performing a perfect ambush on a long, dead monster if not for the fear of whatever had killed it in the first place. Looking around, he hesitated and summoned the azure blade back, then wrapped himself in the shadow. The small island was silent except for the howling of the wind. The rain was still falling down, forming a constant veil that hid away all details and distant objects. A rare flash of lightning sometimes flooded this bleak world with stark whiteness. Then a thunderclap would come, making the skies tremble, with cold fright settling deep into his bones. Sonny cautiously moved to the next scavenger. He could tell from some distance that it was also dead, but had to come closer and make sure. Indeed, he was right. The creature was almost severed in half by the unknown assailant. Its wet innards were lying on the ground in a messy pile. The darkness had long ago stopped being comforting, becoming terrifying and oppressive instead. Sonny shivered. By the time he checked on all 8 monsters and confirmed that they were all dead, he was nauseous and scared out of his wits. When Sonny had first realized that the black shapes were, in fact, scavengers, he thought that the situation was as bad as it could get. Now he wasn't sure anymore. In fact, he was pretty convinced that things went from bad to worse. Standing near the last scavenger, Sonny observed his surroundings and thought about returning to Neff and Cassie. Maybe the terrifying killer had already left the island. They could just hide and hope for the best. He wouldn't be alone, at least. However, not knowing what kind of danger was hiding in the darkness would drive him insane long before the morning came. Plus, with his fated attribute, hoping for the best was a fool's errand. That's why, although his body was covered in cold sweat, Sonny gritted his teeth and slowly walked toward the ridge that was obscuring the rest of the island from him. Coming close, he started climbing, trying to be as quiet as possible. The ridge wasn't very high, so he was able to scale it without much effort. Sticking close to the rocks, he raised his head and looked down. Then he immediately wanted to let go and fall to the ground. Right beneath him, just a few meters away, a dark silhouette was outlined. Against the rocks, it was much larger than the scavengers, with jagged spikes growing out of its thick carapace. Its chitin was black and crimson, like an ancient armor splattered with fresh blood. Instead of pincers, too, terrifying bone scythes were protruding from the joints of its arms. Each one was long and sharp enough to split a scavenger in two. Sonny froze, afraid to move. He even stopped breathing. So that's the killer. It was one of those monsters that they had seen retrieving the transcendent. Soul shards from the giant shark's carcass, or another of their kind. He remembered how the two creatures had cut through the horde of scavengers, killing or throwing aside any beast that got in their way. Slaughtering just 7 of them would not pose a problem for something that deadly. Not to mention getting rid of 3 sleepers. Careful not to make a sound, Sonny slowly lowered himself down. His whole body was trembling. Moving his arms and legs with utmost precision, he began climbing down from the ridge, praying not to be heard, sensed, or noticed in some other way. Luckily, the monster remained oblivious to his presence. Reaching the ground, Sonny took a few steps back, still facing the ridge. He had to force himself to turn around, feeling as though his back was being pierced by invisible needles. The young man stealthily moved in the direction where he had left his companions. A couple of minutes later, he returned to Nephi's and Cassie. The girls were tense and nervous, waiting for his return in the darkness. Before coming out of the shadows, Sonny let them know that he was approaching. "It's me." Nephi's moved, lowering her sword a little. Her face was a little grim. "What is the situation?" she said, careful to keep her voice low. Sonny slowly exhaled, finally feeling a bit safer. For the first time, he was genuinely happy not to be alone in this cursed place. "There are 8 scavengers around us, but they're all dead. The killer is one of those big monsters we saw, the thing with the crimson pattern on its carapace and scythes instead of pincers. It's hiding from the storm beneath a stone ridge not far from here." A bolt of lightning flashed, illuminating everything around. In its aftermath, it looked as though 2 white sparks ignited in Changing Star's eyes. Soon, the reflection was gone, leaving them gray and inscrutable again. She tilted her head and whispered as though talking to herself. "An awakened monster." Sonny licked his lips. "Yeah. So what should we do?" Nephi's thought for a while, leaning on her sword. Then she looked at him and said, "Kill it." Sonny stared at her, lost for words. Finally, he collected himself and said, the first thing that came to his mind, "Are you nuts?" The idea of fighting that thing was pretty ridiculous, if not completely insane. Realizing that his words might have sounded a bit rude, he cleared his throat and added, "I mean, have you thought this through? How are we supposed to kill that monstrosity?" Nephi slowly inhaled. "It's not a question of thinking things through. We simply have no choice." She glanced at Cassie, who was listening to them with a pale face, and explained, "We can't leave the cliffs before morning, and neither can the monster. However, once the sun rises, it will easily see us and attack. Then our only advantage, the element of surprise, will be gone, if we have to fight it. Anyway, it's better to be the ones initiating the fight." Changing Star looked around and added, "It's not completely dark yet. Although barely, I can still see. Once the night comes, this won't be the case, so we will have to attack it first and do it soon." Sonny shook his head. "This still doesn't explain how we are going to kill it. That thing just dispatched 8 scavengers like it was nothing. We are not its opponents. We don't even know its weaknesses." Nephi's frowned. After a short pause, she said, "It's just an awakened monster." Sonny couldn't help but stare at her in disbelief. "What do you mean, just an awakened monster? Have you forgotten that? All 3 of us are only sleepers. Dormant humans are not supposed to be able to deal with awakened beasts, let alone monsters. The fact that we can reliably kill scavengers is already abnormal." She looked back at him, undisturbed, and simply answered, "But we are abnormal." Sonny stood there with his mouth open, not knowing what to say. Nephi sighed. "You and I both are not exactly ordinary sleepers, aren't we? Don't try and deny it. Someone ordinary simply would not have survived in this place." He frowned, not happy about her line of thought. Meanwhile, Changing Star continued, "You, me, plus the awakened beast you have as an echo, plus the advantage of a surprise attack. I'm not saying that it will be easy. We might die, but there's a good chance that we won't." She looked down at the silvery blade of her sword and added after a couple of seconds, "In any case, as I have already said, we don't have a choice." Sonny gritted his teeth, trying to find a logical retort. However, her reasoning seemed unassailable. He just had a really bad feeling about fighting that monster. In the ensued silence, Cassie, who had been quiet all this time, suddenly spoke. "You are forgetting about the main advantage we have over that thing." Both of them looked at her, surprised. The blind girl turned to face them and slightly lifted her head. "We are intelligent, and the monster is not." Her words echoed in the darkness. Sunny sighed. It seemed that a fight with the bone-scythe monster was inevitable. Some time later, he was standing in the darkness, looking at the terrifying creature in front of him. His expression was grim and somber. Tightly gripping the azure blade, Sunny slowly inhaled. The ominous feeling he had before was still there, now stronger than ever. "I don't like this." With this thought, he exhaled and raised his hand.